In this video, we will look at how to complete the project plan template. This is based on the business case. So the idea is that the business case is submitted for approval, and once it's approved, we have an official project and we do the detailed planning. So the early part of the project plan is actually based on the business case, which means we can do some copy and pasting. I'm going to scroll up to the business case and copy and paste some key information. So first of all, the project title should remain the same. So I'm just going to copy and then paste that down into my template. The project sponsor should also be the same. We had it as a HR manager, Mary Smith. The project description, unless anything's changed, we also copy and paste. Going to copy that there and paste it into the template. One change I'll make to this is to specify that it's an online survey. So our current description is an employee engagement survey will be developed and implemented to gauge staff attitudes and identify employee engagement strategies for 2020. The engagement survey will be delivered online. Strategic alignment, as with the previous business case, we should align that to the strategic plan. And again would be a copy and paste, and this as well, organisational benefits, will also be a copy and paste. Unless advised by the project sponsor, the deliverables will be the same. So we'll have a look at our current deliverables. And through feedback, we might add one more deliverable. I'll just adjust this, which will be provide a report. Our start date, milestones and finish date should also be identical unless there was some feedback from the project sponsor and some changes requested. So here we have an extra deliverable, which is the report. So we might have a date here of putting the report in. So let's say it's the 7th of May. Report submitted. In the next section, we want to identify the project scope. So this is what we'll actually be delivering. It's the parameters of the project. This needs to be very specific because otherwise key stakeholders may be confused or have the wrong expectations about what you're actually going to do and deliver in the project. So our project scope will include development of an online survey instrument, implementation of the online survey to all employees. So here we have a parameter that it's going to everybody. If this survey were only going to one department, for example, then you would need to make that very clear in this identification of scope. So here we have a number of different parts to our scope. So development of the online survey instrument, the implementation to all employees. We're going to analyse the data, identify employee engagement strategies, evaluate the design and implementation, and provide a written report. Now, the identification of the strategies, if you wanted to be more specific, you might say how many. So you could say of at least 3 employee engagement strategies for 2020, because this will be much easier to manage and will give a clear expectation to stakeholders. So for example, some stakeholders might be expecting 10 different strategies, others may be just expecting a couple. We're saying there'll be at least 3. Or you could provide an exact number. You could say the 5 key strategies or something like that. So the main point here though is that the scope is extremely clear. To make the scope even clearer, we want to consider what might be excluded from the scope. So the logical thing that a stakeholder may believe could be included would be printed or manually administered surveys. So manual printed surveys are out of scope for this project. In your project, you would consider anything that a stakeholder may believe that you would be delivering. They could be things like expecting training when you're not actually providing training. So make it very, very clear exactly the parameters. So here is what's in and here is what's out. Assumptions are things that are assumed to be in place even if there's no proof, and they're things that need to be in place for your project to be successful. So some typical assumptions could be to do with the project team. So it could be assumed that the project team will be released from operational roles or tasks to work exclusively on the project. So if you have a big project, it's not going to work very effectively for staff to be trying to do their normal job and the project work at the same time. Presumably there's some funding required, so you might say funding will be released as required by the project. This way, if the provision of funding were to hold up the project, you've now covered yourself in that you've said that it's your assumption that you'll receive funds when you need it, meaning that if funds are not released when you need it, really that's not your fault. You've flagged it, you've raised it, and the organisation is at fault there, not the project manager. So think carefully with your project. What might certain stakeholders assume, or what might you need to assume to make sure that your project is successful? Constraints are anything that restrict or dictate the actions of your project team. They're limitations, and these often involve time and resources. So if you're discussing constraints to do with time or budget, make very clear what they are. So for example, this one may be the project must be completed before June 2020 or within 3 months. So you may have a specific time constraint. The project budget must not exceed, let's say, $30,000. So here again, you're just specifying exactly what the limit to the project is. Another constraint could be the project cannot progress during the April-Easter period due to staff absences. So you're making it clear that the calendar, that the timeline is going to be affected by a holiday season there. So if your project went over Christmas or had anything to do with school holidays or anything, you may put that as a constraint to your project. So have a good think about the type of project you have and what might limit it. Sometimes this could even be things like weather. Your project will be interdependent on other projects and activities, so here's the opportunity to mention that. So for example, if your project is to do with training and the organisation has a lot of training going on, then you will be needing to understand this training schedule so that staff can actually commit to or complete your project as well. So I would say the interdependencies with other projects would be a number of activities going on in the organisation. In some instances, your project will be dependent on another project being completed or starting, so make sure you consider that. And also that some other projects may be depending on you finishing your project. So in this instance, we're going to come up with some strategies. There'll be some secondary project to implement those strategies. They're going to be waiting on the results of this project to decide what those strategies are and then how they will be implemented. In the next video, we'll look at how to produce a work breakdown structure.